Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about the Wheel of Time. We're almost done with it. This is me talking about another aspect of the book series in retrospect that is problematic. And I think after this I'll just do one on the good aspects of the series. But, let's start with this one. This is certainly going to be the darkest one because I'm going to look at very, very toxic stereotypes and extremely toxic and harmful narratives within the Wheel of Time that go beyond what I said before about sexism and world building, because there's more. So that's what we'll talk about today. Welcome, everybody. I talk about books normally. I'm Raf. Glad you can make it. If you like it here, subscribe, like, join us in discussions. I really appreciate all of that. Yeah, I guess this is where we're going with this. And I'll go and cheer one of my Patreon backers as a thank you. Jack Rupert, this one's for you, my friend. Cheers. So yeah, this is certainly a thing. If you want to be cheered personally, there's a Patreon, but you don't have to actually go there. I mean, I'd love it, I'd appreciate it, but yeah. Anyway, let's start with this. Now, I'll go and structure it in something of a way. I'll look at stereotypes first, then I'll look at narratives. I think that makes more sense. And I'll start with one really important caveat here. I don't think that Robert Jordan, the writer, did a lot of these things on purpose. I don't think that Robert Jordan was a racist, anti-Semite, and a lot of other things that I'll point at here. Especially, I don't think that. But what he does, and other fantasy does the same in some quantities, is he took a lot of stereotypes, subconscious things that he grew up with and so forth, and perpetuated those narratives and those stereotypes in his series. As I said, a lot of other books do the same. It is just that the Wheel of Time does it more so, which is why we have to talk about it here. But I'll point at some other authors that do similar things, or some of those things as well. They're certainly out there, and as I said, it is not really the point that I don't want anyone to read The Wheel of Time or hate it or whatever. That's not my point. If you read it as a kid or grown up and you have like all these fun nostalgic memories with, that's fantastic. If you're enjoying it these days, that's still fantastic, even though I personally think there's much better books out there. But it is important that we are aware of all these toxic elements in there, that we can recognize them and realize that what they are and do better and try to not get influenced by them, because that's obviously always the answer. The danger there, right, is that these toxic things seep in our perception of the world, and we then subconsciously take them somewhere else, and that's where they can cause harm. So that's sort of like the beginning speech. I'm not calling Robert Jordan anything here except a bad writer, but I feel it's important to look at all these toxic elements that these 14 books have over the series, and I've picked out a few here. There's more. I'm going to make a large excursion around the Orientalism, because yes, there is Orientalism in Wheel of Time. There's a lot of it in there, but I feel it might be interesting to actually have a look at Orientalism, the original book by Edward Said, and how it applies to fantasy in general. So I'll probably do that instead of just pointing out all the Orientalism, the rampant Orientalism in Wheel of Time, without explaining what Orientalism really means. And we don't have time for that today, but assume there's also Orientalism. All right, so I'll start with some cultural stereotypes that are very unfortunate, but in the larger scheme of things, not the biggest issues with the Wheel of Time. And there we start with the anti-Semitism. Wonderful, isn't it? So yeah, here's the thing. There are peddlers in Wheel of Time. There's basically two, and I don't even want to say a half, but two and one final one that shows up once and has false news or wrong news, and that's it. And those two are Padan Fane and whatever the other guy's name is, who shows up in The Shadow Rising mostly, and a little bit in Fires of Heaven before he dies, I assume. I think it dies in Fires of Heaven. But yeah. And we have a problem here, because both of them are described as swarthy, with huge beaks of a nose. And they are traveling merchants that are all about making money. And that kind of sounds already like something. And then we come to like the kicker. Both of those are evil. Both of those are dark friends. They're part of the evil conspiracy that, serves Shaitan, the Dark One. And that's where we have our anti-Semitic stereotypes. Now, we have the physical appearance, the slightly swarthy, like darker skinned, and the focus on the nose. Now, I know that Padan Fane is like from Lugard, and apparently people in Lugard all have like big noses, just like people in the Borderlands in general seem to be big-nosed people. But he's always referred as the guy with the big nose, and the same happens when that other guy with a more Semitic sounding name that I really can't remember right now, and I will not. Oh, Kadir? Kadir, that's it. Yeah, Kadir. That's the name. Or described like that. So that's like the physical stereotype of the Jewish, the anti-Semitic description of, of Jews. When you look at propaganda posters from like all the way back when we started having, woodcuts and stuff up to now, that's very much the description. So we have that one part of the stereotype. The next one is they are traveling merchants. They're called peddlers, which is something of a derogative term already, but let's focus on the fact that they are traveling merchants. And that's another Semitic stereotype. It's kind of rooted in history, because during European Middle Ages, a lot of the far trade was handled by Jews, because Jews actually could move within European realms, because they were, at least in the German part of the realm in the Middle Ages, they were citizens of the empire, and they directly under the protection of the emperor, and thus not locked into one specific region, because they did not belong, so to speak, or be under the protection of one specific feudal lord. And there's all kinds of other aspects to it, but like far trade, traveling merchants, is something that is deeply connected with Jews in like history. So we have big-nosed people who travel around, bring news, and make deals. That's already kind of, and they also, seem to be kind of greedy and all about maybe cheating here and there to make more money, which the connection with money, I guess I don't have to talk about why, that is part of the anti-Semitic stereotype here, but it's there. Now, all of that would be, kind of tasteless, and you're like, well, whatever. I guess he thought of like rich merchant, and he figured like, oh, Jew. But then we come to the fact that both Kadir and Padan Fane are also dark friends, and thus part of the evil conspiracy. And that's where the stereotype turns really ugly and dangerous. Now, does Robert Jordan say anywhere that all peddlers are dark friends? Of course he doesn't. We only get those two examples, and the one whom we just don't meet long enough to figure out anything about him. So the examples are, unfortunately, both, like, basically 90% of peddler interaction in these books is with big-nosed fellows who are part of the evil conspiracy to take over the world. And that's really, really unfortunate. And once again, I don't think Robert Jordan was an anti-Semite. I don't know. But I think he just connected things in his subconscious, anti-Semitic stereotypes that we all have, we grow up in the West at least, have been, faced with. We've all heard of those somewhere in all kinds of ways, how it came into like our language and all kinds of depictions and whatnot. So I think he just like connected at that point. He went like, I need a traveling merchant who's also like a trader with pen and fane at least, right? I need that. How could he look? And then that stereotype plopped into his brain, and he just like, yeah, that's a good idea. And yeah, I don't think that's really good or clever or anything. I think we should, at this point in time, and yes, we're talking about the late 80s when he wrote that first book, and yes, we're talking about the 90s when he wrote the next traveling merchant there. But yeah, I think we should be at a point where we question those kind of things. Like, when I think of a traveling merchant, does he have to be that stereotype? Don't get me wrong, I'm guilty of having like traveling merchants that adhere to certain, either anti-Zigonist or anti-Semitic stereotypes when I started playing role-playing games in the beginning. I totally did that because I didn't know any better, but we should know better at this point, which is why I pointed this one out. Again, it's like, there's a very ugly anti-Semitic stereotype with in here. And that's a problem, right? All right, let's look at the next one that I think is a problem. The anti-Zigonist one. So we have in the first book, in Eye of the World, we meet the traveling people, the Tuathon. And yes, I know they are mostly modeled after traveling people or tinkers, as he calls them, from like the Irish background. I know that. But he still goes through some of the typical anti-Zigonist stereotypes. And Robert Jordan does something interesting here where I think he fails in like a way that we can learn from. What do I mean by that? So we start out and everyone is like, oh, tinkers, they go and steal all our stuff and steal our children. That's certainly a stereotype or a bad, negative stereotype that you hear a lot of about Sinti and Romani people in Europe, for example. You hear that a lot. And what Robert Jordan does, and this is where we come to the positive stereotypes that are nevertheless stereotypes and can still be very harmful in their consequences. He has that interaction with Egwene and Perrin showing up to the Tuathon camp, and they learn that of course that is not true. They don't steal. Tuathon don't steal. They're like good people. And you can just almost feel Robert Jordan patting himself on the shoulders like, I subverted a stereotype. So what does he do? He shows them just dancing and singing and being extremely passionate about these kind of things and basically being lazy and just all about music and dance and passion. And that's another stereotype. It's a positive stereotype if you take away the idea that they are basically lazy because they don't do any like actual work or anything. But apart from that, the idea of the love of music, the passion and all of that, that's a positive stereotype that we still find, and the consequences of that can once again be problematic, all kinds of problematic, because they form our view of a group of people that has by and large been treated like shit in European history. Like really badly. And especially because of both these positive and negative stereotypes. So that's already one problem that we have here. And then we come to a sort of tasteless issue there, and that's a bad taste issue, and that is the Aram Egwene plotline. Why is that a problem? All right, so Egwene shows up, and they're like welcomed by Rain and whatever his wife's name is, and everything's fine. And then Aram shows up, and he's good-looking. He's a good-looking tinker, and he flirts with Egwene, and she falls for him like first second. Now, granted, we see all of this through Perrin's viewpoint, sort of, but the narrative is still there. It's one that is extremely toxic and is, I don't want to call it white fragility, but it's certainly something that you see. It's xenophobic, and it's something, a narrative that is deployed again and again against immigrants, against minorities in all kinds of ways. And that is, those men from outside come and with their more animal vitality or whatever, our white women will be completely incapable of withstanding them, and they'll take all our women away. And that's a narrative that you've seen in, say, 2015, 2016, when a lot of immigrants and refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and so forth came to Germany, for example. It was like very much the narrative that the Nazis used, or neo-Nazis used at the time. It's something that you see again and again in that regard, that specific narrative. Now, in this case, it's obviously not a refugee, he's a Tuathon, but it still is there. And the problem is that, once again, we connect that with the positive stereotype of the Tuathon being very, passionate and all about emotions, a bit more animalistic in a way. They dance all day long, it's all about music and dancing and sensuality. We connect those with their culture. They're like a very sensual people, and good old Two Rivers folks, women, will be incapable of withstanding them, which is interesting because at the same time, our good, strong male character, Perrin, does. Well, he's shy and he's embarrassed when Tuathon girls make advances towards him, but he does not go and do anything about it. And that's where we have this like really toxic narrative, which is on the one hand that, and I'll use white in this case because it really is about that. Like, the white women are incapable of, like, have no moral backbone, so to speak, and will fall for like exotic men with that animal charm and sensuality every time, whereas good white Christian men have the moral fiber to withstand that, of course, and that's toxic in itself. And once again, that threat, that perceived threat of non-white men, that leads to a lot of, like, violence out there. It's like against refugees, against people of minorities, and that's a huge problem. Now, once again, I don't think Robert Jordan set out to talk about the danger of non-white men to white women. That was not the thing that he wanted to talk about, I assume. It's just, once again, this is a narrative that has been in our culture forever and ever and ever, and he just picks that one and makes it part of his story because he thinks it's interesting. I mean, there's more to that whole parallel with Egwene flirting and Rand trying to not flirt when a girl tries to flirt with him, which, that women have like loose morals and men are all very uptight in this world is, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous when you see that after that Rand obviously has like 3 girlfriends at one time, and, but we're not going too deeply into that today. I just wanted to point out that this is very much anti-Sigonist stereotypes, subverting the negative stereotypes by falling for a positive stereotype that can still have dire consequences afterwards, and having that specific narrative of the white woman falling for the non-white man. That's, I don't have to tell you to what kind of like atrocities that leads and what kind of violent deeds out there that can lead. You can just watch the news. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether Aram is a Tuathon or, well, in our world, either a person from North Africa or any other person of color, really. And that's the sad part of it. Alright, so we had another one. Let's look at one more here and then continue to the really toxic narratives, I think. Well, 1 or 2. Alright. Let's look at Arid Oman and the idea that Domani women are merchants and know all about the art of seduction, and they'll use it, and we'll use that one in a minute for like a really, really toxic story afterwards, but I figure we'll talk first about that one, and I'll, So, the idea is that in this world, we come back to the national characters that I spoke about before. Domani women know all about the art of seduction. They're all seductresses, and they're also cold-hearted about it. They use it to get what they want, which nevertheless means, and we get that shown. That is shown to us explicitly again and again how Domani women are doing that, and how they're supposedly to be masters, mistresses, geniuses at seduction. And, the corollary for that is obviously that they'll also be insanely good in bed afterwards, right? Because we never learn how far that will go. And now that is obviously a narrative that we've heard about all kinds of. Once again, it's a racist thing, it's an Orientalist thing, it's very much part of like Orientalism and a lot of hatred towards not all parts, but like groups of especially Asian women. It's something that we find again where misogyny and racism combine, and Robert Jordan just builds this into his world. Now, I know Domani aren't real, don't get me out like that, but the problem is that he builds a world where that is an actual fact of the universe. It's something everyone believes, and it's something that is borne out by the scenes that we have of either Domani women acting somewhere. There's the whole Liana, whatever, you know who I mean, acting like that in Lugard when they basically almost burn down the tavern because she's trying to flirt with someone. Those kind of situations, it is borne out in the world, and that is, once again, it's a terrible stereotype because it leads to a lot of sexual violence towards women of a specific nationality or specific ethnicity, because everyone has heard that they are insanely hot and insanely good in bed or whatever, and like, terrible. And putting those kind of stories as a basis for your world building, once again, can have all kinds of really bad consequences later on. I just wanted to point this one out because it just rankled me a lot. Once again, it's connected to the Orientalism that we're not talking about today, because those cliches are like those stereotypes, those negative stereotypes, or those like dangerous stereotypes are very much connected with parts of Orientalism and especially views towards Asian. I mean, Asian is like a huge term that we're not going to define deeper here right now, but you know what I mean, I hope. So we have that problem there. Let's continue with one final of the really dumb stereotypes, and then I'll pick out two narratives that are insanely toxic. And that is the Red Arja. It's fairly easy. They are out there to hunt men because, they have to, for in-world reasons, which is, men go mad when they channel, so it makes sense to have a group to actually find them and supposedly help them. Do something about it because, no one wants to go mad. Ever. And I'm fine with that idea. That's so far, so good. But then, when we come to the idea of maybe there might be homosexuality somewhere in Wheel of Time, which is only admitted either with like one token gay character who doesn't play any role in like the final book, or with it's not really love, it's just like playing around for women in the White Tower earlier on when they call them pillow friends. But it is very strongly hinted that all those Red Arja, except like one example that then, hangs out with Andral, is her name Tovain? Maybe. See, I'm already forgetting all kinds of names, which is good. But the point is, apart from that, most of the Red Arja we meet and whom we like get into their thoughts, which is not that many, but all of those are really hate men. They hate men, even those who can't channel, and they might, and it's strongly hinted that they are more into women than men. There might be lesbians. So we have the cliche of the man-hating lesbian that actually goes out and hunts men. And suddenly it's no longer because they are a danger to the world, but it's apparently because they're dudes. And yeah, that's a terrible stereotype that has been around for a long time. It's usually connected with, feminism, and people think, like on the right, mostly anti-feminists, misogynist people think or have that image of feminists as man-hating lesbians, which is obviously absolutely wrong and has no basis in reality whatsoever. But the fact that Robert Jordan feels it is a good idea to put that into the book, like into the subtext, is what I mean by like really negative stereotype. I'm like, why are you doing this? There's literally no reason to hint that Red Arja not only hunt men who can channel, which it makes him a threat for Rand and some others as well, and they might get it wrong, be overzealous, and sometimes kill someone or attack someone like Perrin who has unexplained powers. I can see all of that, but to make it into, yes, they hate people with dicks, And they're also lesbians. Like, what? That information is completely unnecessary. It does not, forward the story unless you want to make a point about man-hating lesbians, which, in that case, well, fuck you. All right, so that's another one of those stereotypes. And there's so many more that I can't get into here. The way it treats mental health is an absolute atrocity, but once again, I think there might be a point where it might be helpful to talk about the portrayal of mental health in fantasy in general. So I'm going to skirt around that. Now let's look at two actual narratives that I would say are really, truly harmful and go beyond just unfortunate stereotypes by someone who did not reflect on what they knew, thought, and wrote. And those are the transphobic one and the rape apology. The victim-blaming one. So let's start with that one. It is in Fires of Heaven, and it kind of connects to the whole Damani thing. And we have that conversation in the first or second chapter of Fires of Heaven with Liana and Swan Sanche, and Min is our viewpoint character there, and Logain is also there around, and Liana talks about the art of seduction and how she is trying to apply it to do all kinds of things, and that is already kind of a problem because it shows that apparently all women are manipulative. But we go beyond that. And that's where the toxic bit comes. And it's really one of the things where I was really short, this close to just stopping the book and just throwing it away because it's insane. All right. So what happens is they talk about that, and Liana says that she didn't want to try her flirting techniques on Logain, because Logain looks like someone who might see more than was implied and would not take no for an answer. Now, so far, this is a straight-up thing. It's there's dudes who don't get consent, which, is a thing, and it's terrible, but it's on the dudes. And this is where it gets problematic, or horrifying. Because Liana continues then that in such a situation that her aunt told her, or her mother told her, that if you reach that situation where a man understands more than you meant, and you have not left yourself a way out of that situation, you're to blame, and you need to either abandon dignity or and run, or learn your lesson. And then he adds, and this is when it gets even worse, and then he adds, Robert Jordan, the writer, and she added with a smile, focus on the smile, my aunt said, learn your lesson and enjoy it. All right, I hope I don't have to explain all of this, but I'm going to do it anyway. So we switch the narrative. So it's if a man reads more into a situation and does not take no for an answer, it is the woman who tried to seduce him who went too far, who is to blame. It's not the guy who's to blame. It's straight out of book victim blaming right there, which is absolutely fucked up. We should not do that at all. The idea that running away in that situation would be about abandoning dignity is already pretty fucked up. The idea if you don't want to do that, you have to learn your lesson is even more fucked up. And the idea that you might learn your lesson and enjoy it is just beyond me. It's that something like that could be written. And we're talking the Fires of Heaven, that's 1993, 1994. And I know those were different times, but even back then we should have kind of gotten the point, or an editor, maybe even his wife, an editor, could have read that sentence, that bit in there, and just said, you know what, Bobby J, we're gonna strike that one because it's fucked up. And it does never come up again afterwards. It is not, there is no reason why this scene is in there except Robert Jordan, the author, trying to make a comment about male-female relationships, apparently, because Liana doesn't flirt with anyone who reads too much into it. It never gets picked up again. It's just like something he puts in there for no reason whatsoever, but to make a comment on the, well, the woman is to blame, and secretly she might even enjoy it. And that's just, yeah, that's clear up victim blaming and rape apology, and we don't need that in books at all. And I really hope that people reading it these days go like, the fuck? But I felt I needed to point this out because, once again, these are toxic narratives that have been around forever. It's a story that has been around forever. The argument about the amount of victim blaming we still get in, like, all kinds of sexual violence is insane. And the amount of, like, but secretly she wanted it is, yeah, it is there. And Robert Jordan felt it necessary to put it into his book for reasons. And yeah, I felt it necessary to point out how this is like one of the really, really toxic ones, because because it is not like culture particular to the Wheel of Time or anything. If you read that as a like adolescent person or whatever, this will, have an influence on your view of the world in one way or another. Either you get really pissed off, hopefully you get really pissed off and think like, what an asshole that guy is, or you file it away because have been exposed to all kinds of other narratives like that before. You're like, yeah, he's speaking truth. And then it reinforces that toxic stereotype that leads to a lot of really terrible behavior afterwards in our world. It has real consequences. All right, let's look at the transphobic one, and then I guess we're sort of done. I'm obviously talking about the Tarangar situation. Now, to sum up, there is a guy, I keep forgetting his name, he's a very unnecessary Forsaken. He gets killed at the end of Eye of the World. He just shows up, is he Balthalmael or something like that? Who knows? He gets killed, and he's very much a dude at the time. A couple of books later, he gets reconstituted. I think it's at the beginning of Lord of Chaos. He gets reconstituted, reborn, recreated, whatever, by the Dark One, who apparently can do these kind of things. And he gets the body of a woman. He's now called Tarangar. Although we never really learn that, because most of the time she's called Halima. No, yeah. We haven't spoken about the Islamophobia, the subtext in there, but we won't. Point is, Tarangar has the appearance of a female, of a woman, of a very beautiful, attractive woman, sensuous and all of these things, but still uses dick magic, still uses the male half of the source that I usually call dick magic. And, I mean, that's already pretty fucked up, because basically what it tells you is that, appearances aside, they are still a dude. And that's already kind of transphobic, well, But we go beyond that, because what happens then, and that's her plotline, is that Tarangar, Halima, goes to invade and subvert the Aes Sedai. So she moves into the very much female space, a female safe space, so to speak, disguised as a woman. And then even goes and murders other women using her dick magic, which makes it very difficult for the women to discover who the actual murderer, the predator, is. And now we have us a really fucked up narrative here, because the trans killer is certainly something that we've seen around. It comes up again and again, whether in Psycho, in all kinds of ways. There's videos out there that you can watch if you really feel you need an update on that whole storyline, on that narrative. But it comes up again and again, and Robert Jordan felt it was a good idea to include that plot line in there as well. And once again, this leads to all kinds of transphobic violence and things beyond that. And, you know, at the end of the day, books like that last one that J.K. Rowling wrote, which is sort of the same problem, right? So we have this transphobic narrative, and once again, it does not really need to be there. It doesn't really do that much plot-wise, because her effectiveness beyond killing a few women that no one really cared about because they're side characters is fairly limited. And the problem is that this plotline is a fairly late one. It goes all the way to the last books that Robert Jordan himself wrote in the early 2000s. And while I'm aware of the fact that, say, trans issues in general have only reached like the mainstream attention in very recent history, this is still very close to our own time right now. So the whole "yeah, but it was a different time" argument does not really fly, in my opinion. So, let's try to sum all of this up. The Wheel of Time as a series has a lot of stereotypes that I think Robert Jordan put in there mostly subconsciously, because he's a product of his history and he did not reflect on the things he did there. That is, however, a problem, because a lot of these toxic stereotypes that I've pointed out this time around, the anti-Semitism, the anti-Ziganism, the story of having women of a specific country, a specific ethnicity, be described and thought of as promiscuous, sexually overactive, or whatever. Having the story of having a group of man-hating, man-hunting lesbians walk around. The idea of victim blaming and rape apology, and finally the storyline of the trans killer predator. Having those in here leads to all kinds of real-world consequences, and it is important that we address these and that we are aware of what is going on in these books, because just because Robert Jordan might not have set out to write a transphobic, anti-Semitic, and all these other things story, he nevertheless included all of these things in situations where they were not necessarily needed to characterize or drive the story. They were just there because it's the worldview of the author that we see through this in some regard. Not the conscious worldview, but certainly general ideas of like how he looked at specific aspects of the world. And that, I think, is a huge problem. Now, can you still go and love The Wheel of Time? Of course you can. But think about what you've just read there, and think about whether that is something that you would subscribe to in your own world, in your life. Is that really what you want? Because I don't think it is. And as I've said at the beginning, there are, of course, other fantasy books that have 1 or 2 or 3 similar storylines that are problematic. There's one I remember in the Dragonbone chair, like Memory, Sorrow, Thorn, I think in like the last book, maybe, that has very uncomfortable ideas on sexual, on consent and those kind of things going on. It's all over the place. But with The Wheel of Time, because it is such a huge and sprawling series, I think it is interesting, or also like very much saddening to look at this collection of so many, so toxic, so harmful stereotypes and ideas that go way beyond those fundamentals that I laid out in these other 2 videos. I think what I've showed you today and pointed out today is very much the consequence of having a fundamentally nationalist worldview when it comes to the world building, and a very sexist, borderline misogynist worldview when it comes to gender issues. And having those 2 things combined leads to these extremely toxic elements later on, and those are actually really harmful. And I'd like to not read that anymore, please. And this, I guess, is the other side of why this is important. The Wheel of Time has been hugely influential, not only on readers, but also on writers. And if we don't point these things out, They might just show up in the next batch of fantasy books written by people that read The Wheel of Time, were impressed by Robert Jordan, so we need to talk about that. And that's what I want to do with you down in the comments. If you've made it this far, thank you so very, very much. Let me know what you think about it. If you have read The Wheel of Time this far, do you agree that those elements are toxic? Do you agree that, do you think Robert Jordan put them in on purpose? Do you think he was just not thinking about what he was doing there? Do you think the editors should have maybe taken a more heavy hand there from time to time? Let me know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe, share, and yeah, can't wait to see you in the next one. Cheers.